My name is Giselle. I'm 34, and I work as a forensic accountant. After 10 grueling months in Singapore, auditing a corporation, the only thing I longed for was to hold my 15-year-old daughter, Lily, in my arms. The reunion at the airport exceeded every expectation. She had grown taller, her face slimmer. That first evening, as we unpacked my luggage, I casually asked, "Hey, was that $3,000 a month?" I had sent enough, for the college fund and that intensive SAT tutoring program. Was it all right? Lily just stared at me blankly. "What money, Mom?" My blood ran cold. It wasn't just confusion in her voice. It was emptiness. She had no idea what I was referring to. 10 months, $30,000, all of it gone in a blink. If you're reading this, comment and tell me where you are. Have you ever had that gut-wrenching realization that something is fundamentally, horribly wrong? I didn't cry. I didn't yell. My reaction isn't emotion. It's data. I calmly told Lily to head to her room and put on a movie, promising I'd join her soon. The moment her door clicked shut, I got to work. I didn't pick up my phone. I opened my laptop. 10 transfers, $3,000 each, $30,000 in total. All successfully deposited into the joint account I shared with my parents, Mark and Jennifer. My first move wasn't confrontation, it was containment. I logged into the bank. I froze the crime scene. I immediately moved the remaining balance into a separate account under my name only. I stopped all future automatic transfers. I changed every password before they had the slightest hint that I suspected anything. I had already cut off the flow. You have to understand, my husband passed away 5 years ago. This Singapore assignment, 10 months of relentless auditing, was a monumental step for my career. It was supposed to secure the future for me, for Lily, for my parents. They had agreed to take Lily in. Their house was beautiful, in a wealthy neighborhood. I thought it was the perfect, stable environment. This wasn't casual. We had an agreement, even if it was unspoken, that $3,000 a month wasn't for babysitting. It was an itemized plan, $5,000 for elite SAT prep, the remaining $25,000 directly into her college trust fund. It was a clear, transactional understanding. But I forgot one lesson my father, Mark, always drilled into me about business, always read the fine print. My parents looked successful, or at least they appeared so. My father's construction business had thrived in the 90s, but I knew it had been faltering for years. They were trapped in that familiar trap of maintaining appearances. House rich, cash poor. Their identity was built entirely on how neighbors in their upscale community perceived them. They would rather do anything than admit failure. And now I realized that anything included stealing from their own granddaughter. They weren't merely greedy. They were desperate. And desperation is far more dangerous. The next morning, the house felt different. Colder. I stepped into the kitchen and saw it the first tangible evidence. The countertops weren't the old laminate I remembered. They were thick, polished granite, at least a $10,000 renovation. Sitting atop the new granite, next to a sleek high-end coffee machine, was a pile of travel brochures. Not for a weekend getaway. Not a modest resort. My initial thought wasn't anger. 'Twas cold clinical analysis. 'Twasn't a mistake or mismanagement. This was deliberate overspending. My mother, Jennifer, walked in, smiling, offering coffee from her shiny new machine. I wanted to ask about Lily's SAT course. Instead, I kept my voice level. "The $5,000 course I sent. How did it go?" She waved dismissively. Her smile didn't falter. "Oh, honey, you know how stressed Lily gets? It was just too much." I told her it was fine to quit. I just nodded. Lily, who practiced soccer drills in the pouring rain until perfect. Lily, who had taught herself to code. My daughter never quits. That was lie number one. Then my sister Jessica appeared, 31, still living at home, swinging a brand new, very expensive designer bag. I looked at the bag, then at her. New, Jessica scoffed. What? Mom and Dad are practically raising your kid. Giselle, you think sending a little money lets you judge? You're not even here. Stop being ungrateful. And in that instant, it hit me. This was escalation. They weren't defensive. They weren't ashamed. They were attacking. They genuinely believed they were victims and I was the ungrateful one. They thought they had a right to my daughter's future. I had to get Lily out. I told her we were going for lunch, just the two of us, away from the granite countertops, away from passive-aggressive remarks. We sat in a small cafe booth. She picked at her fries. I could see the weight of 10 months on her 15-year-old shoulders. Lily, I said gently, I'm not angry at you, but I need the truth. What's been happening? Her eyes widened with something I hadn't seen before. Fear, Mom, she whispered. They said you weren't coming home. My heart stopped. Not coming home. They said your Singapore project was failing, that you were struggling with debt, that you were too ashamed to tell me, she added, her voice cracking. I stared at her. The new kitchen, the designer bag, the Hawaii brochures, all while they were telling my daughter I was failing. She continued, they said me being there was a financial burden, so I quit the soccer team. I needed new cleats. They were falling apart. Grandma said $80 was too much. We just couldn't afford it. $80. They couldn't afford $80 for my daughter, but $10,000 for countertops. The anger cut through me like ice. Then she delivered the final blow. My laptop, she said, eyes fixed on the table. It kept crashing. I couldn't do homework. Grandma said we couldn't afford a new one. So, I asked, barely able to breathe. So what, honey? She looked at me, face crumpling. I sold it, Mom. I sold Dad's guitar. My breath left me. Not just any guitar. His vintage guitar, the one tangible connection to him she still had. She had sold it to a pawn shop for a laptop so she wouldn't burden her struggling mother. My heart didn't just break. It shattered. In that moment, I realized this wasn't just theft. This was psychological dismantling. They hadn't just taken my money. They weaponized guilt. They had turned my daughter into an accomplice in her own neglect. They had stolen her love, her protection, her father's memory. 30 seconds of grief passed. Then the forensic accountant in me took over. I was no longer just a daughter. I wasn't even only a mother. I was an auditor. And this family's books were about to be balanced. I paid the bill, my hand not even shaking. As we walked out of the cafe, I pulled out my phone. I didn't call my parents. I didn't call my sister. I called my Aunt Patricia, my father's sister, the matriarch of the family, and more importantly, the most ruthless lawyer in the state. Aunt Trish, I said, my voice calm and clear. I need your help. I'm opening an investigation into my own family. The part of me that was a daughter, the part that was heartbroken over the guitar, just switched off. The grief went into a box, and the forensic accountant came to the front. The anger wasn't hot, was cold and clinical. I told my Aunt Patricia everything. The $30,000. The failing business lie, the granite countertops, the guitar. There was a long, cold silence on the other end of the line. Finally, she just said, get everything. Every receipt, every statement, every school email. Build the file, Giselle. I'll be ready for it. That was all I needed. I spent the rest of the day building the file. I got the pawn shop receipt for the $1,200 guitar. I got Lily's school records, showing her grades dropping and her official withdrawal from the soccer team. And then, back at the hotel, I started my real audit. I went back to the joint account statements and followed every dollar. Most of it was just lifestyle, cash withdrawals. grocery bills that were twice what they should be, charges at expensive restaurants. But then I found it. It's a single transaction 5 months ago, a $5,000 payment to Elite Sat tutoring services. My heart hammered in my chest. Lily never went to a tutor. My mother had specifically said she quit. This is what I do for a living. I took the company name and ran it through the state's corporate database. It was a registered LLC filed 11 months ago, just 1 week before I left for Singapore. I paid the fee to pull the full incorporation documents. When the name of the registered agent popped up on my screen, I finally understood. The agent was my sister, Jessica. This was the secondary twist. This wasn't just my parents stealing. This was a conspiracy. My sister, the one with the new designer bag, had actively created a shell company. She created fake invoices for $5,000, gave them to our parents to justify the expense, and they had all split the money. This was fraud. And then I saw the final piece of the puzzle, the receipt for an $8,000 jet ski. It was dated 3 days after my very first $3,000 transfer had landed in their account. I let that sink in. This wasn't a slow, desperate slide into theft. This wasn't a mistake. They hadn't been tempted over time. This was a plan. They had been waiting for me to leave. This was a calculated, premeditated embezzlement from the moment I got on that plane. The game was over. This wasn't a family dispute anymore. This was a criminal case, and I had every single receipt I needed to prove it. Thanksgiving dinner. The smell of turkey and roasted vegetables filled the house. But the air was so thick with tension, you could cut it with a carving knife. The whole family was there. My father, Mark, at the head of the table, trying to look patriarchal. My mother, Jennifer, fluttering around, her smile brittle. My sister, Jessica, tapping on her phone, already looking bored and entitled. And then there was my guest, my Aunt Patricia. I'd invited her as a witness. She sat silently, observing, a predator waiting. The small talk was painful. Finally, everyone was seated. My father, Mark, raised his glass. A lot to be thankful for. I let him finish, then gently tapped my water glass with a spoon. The chatter died. "I'd like to say something," I began, my voice cold and clear, cutting through the warm dining room. "I'd like to give thanks, specifically to my assignment in Singapore." My mother smiled, confused. "Oh yes, we're so glad I'm thankful," I continued, "because it's wonderful to know my hard work could fund so many interesting family projects while I was gone." The silence was instant. My father's face darkened. "Now wait a minute, Giselle. We worked hard taking care of Lily." My mother jumped in, her voice suddenly sharp. "The expenses, Giselle, you have no idea." And Jessica, right on cue, sneered from the end of the table. "Are you really going to try and guilt trip us right now after all we did for you?" "No," I said. "I'm not here to guilt trip you." I reached into the designer leather satchel at my feet. "I'm here to audit." I pulled out 3 thick spiral-bound books. I'd spent the last 24 hours at a print shop. On the cover of each, I had printed a single title, The Guardian's Ledger, an audit of accounts. I slid the first one across the polished dining table to my parents. "That's for you." I slid the second one down to Jessica. "That's for you." And I placed the third one gently next to Aunt Patricia. "And that's for counsel." My father opened his hands. They were shaking. My mother just stared at it like it was a bomb. "As you'll see," I said, my voice as level as a balance sheet, "I've compiled a full accounting. It's all in there. The 10 transfers totaling $30,000. You'll find the receipt for the $8,000. Jet ski my father bought 3 days after my first deposit. You'll find the $10,000 invoice for the granite countertops, paid in full. You'll find the $1,200 receipt from the pawn shop for my late husband's guitar." My mother let out a small, strangled sound. "And Jessica," I said, looking my sister dead in the eyes, "if you turn to Appendix B, you'll find the articles of incorporation for your shell company, Elite Tutoring Services, registered 1 week before I left the country." Jessica looked like she was going to be sick. Aunt Patricia, not looking up from the pages, spoke, her voice like ice. "A shell company? Mark wire fraud. You did this to your own brother's child." My mother finally broke. The tears started. "Giselle, please," she sobbed. "We're family. You'll ruin us." I'd been waiting for that. I stood up and placed my napkin on the table. "This isn't revenge, Mom. This is accounting." On Monday morning, Malavia, I nodded at Aunt Patricia. "We'll be sending over a formal restitution agreement. You will repay the $30,000 principal. You will repay the $1,200 for the guitar. You have 48 hours to sign." My father, defiant to the last, croaked, "And if we don't, this audit report, complete with all its evidence of wire fraud and conspiracy, goes directly to the district attorney's office," I said, zipping up my bag. "The choice is yours." This was never a negotiation. I turned to Lily, who had been sitting beside me, silent, her eyes wide. She looked terrified, but she also looked proud. "Let's go, honey," I said, holding out my hand. "We're going to a hotel." We walked out, leaving the binders, the ruined dinner, and the wreckage of my old life behind. They signed. They didn't have a choice. Faced with Aunt Patricia's cold legal threats and a binder full of evidence a prosecutor would love, they buckled completely. The aftermath was clinical. Under my aunt's supervision, my parents were forced to take out a second mortgage on that house, the house they cared about more than their granddaughter, to repay the full $31,200, the $30,000 I'd sent, and the $1,200 for my husband's guitar. The brand new jet ski was sold before the engine was even broken in. My sister Jessica faced a different kind of judgment. Aunt Patricia handled the fraud charge in-house, which was a cold way of saying Jessica's financial life was now owned by our aunt. There would be no more designer bags. But for me and Lily, the resolution wasn't about them. It was about us. We left the hotel and moved into a new apartment in the City Place with high ceilings and big windows that faced the park, a place that was just ours. The very first thing I bought for that apartment, before we even had a sofa, was a guitar, a new one, better than the one she'd lost. I watched her run her fingers over the strings and saw a little bit of the light come back into her eyes. We started therapy, both of us, to unpack the betrayal, but also to process the guilt. Lily felt the guilt that had been so cruelly forced on her. A few weeks later, I got a call from my work. The Singapore audit had been a massive success. They were offering me a promotion, a full partnership track, more travel, more prestige, more money. I thanked them and turned it down. Instead, I took a stable 9-to-5 position at the firm's local office. I chose Lily as I sit here tonight in our new living room, listening to Lily practice new chords on her new guitar. The sound echoing in our safe, cozy apartment. I finally understand. Justice isn't always about revenge. It's not about watching the world burn. It's about restoration. It's about rebuilding what was broken. Sometimes, to protect the ones you love, you have to make ruthless choices. We had to let go of bloodline to find ourselves. Because I've learned that family isn't an obligation you are forced to endure. It's a fortress you build, a place where you are finally safe. Have you ever had to choose between your family and your own peace of mind? Share your story in the comments below. If this journey resonated with you, please subscribe for more stories of justice and healing.